Welcome to Canada, Part 2. In my previous presentation on Canada, we covered from Newfoundland all the way through the eastern provinces to eastern Ontario. Today we will be journeying through northern Ontario, the Prairie Provinces, and on to British Columbia and ending up on Vancouver Island. We are going to be traveling on a train for 4 days and 4 nights, starting out in Toronto and ending up in Vancouver, with a number of stops in between. Before getting on the train, I need to tell you why I needed to make this particular trip. This is a drawing of a picture of a ship my grandparents took. They took it by themselves, each separate, from Scotland to Canada. Once in Canada, they both took a train from Toronto to Vancouver, British Columbia. Several years ago, Carol and I took a train trip over the same route they did, only 100 years later. Let me explain. In 1912, my grandfather left Scotland by himself. He arrived in Canada and took a train west to Vancouver. My grandmother, not married to my grandfather, took the same route, the same ship, the same train, 6 months later by herself. Can you imagine a single woman making the journey across the North Atlantic, then getting on a train and going over a large part of Canada, and doing this in 1913? She was determined to marry my grandfather. They married in Vancouver, British Columbia, and lived just north of the city until World War I broke out, when he was ordered back to Scotland and went to fight in World War I in France. They stayed in Scotland, and my father was born there. And then in 1928, they immigrated to the United States, particularly New York. I never got to ask him why they didn't go to Vancouver, why they chose New York. A little bias there, you might hear in my voice. As I said, we will begin our train trip in Toronto, go up through Sudbury, through northern Ontario to Winnipeg, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and then into British Columbia. And then we'll stop there for a little bit, and then we're going to go over to Vancouver Island. For me, this was a trip down memory lane, not only because my grandparents made this same journey, but it was on train cars that had been refurnished to the same style they were in the 1950s. So for me, it was also a trip back. Why? Both my father and grandfather worked for the New York Central Railroad. And growing up, we had passes that let us ride on trains around the East Coast and Midwest. For a large part, the trains were high-end and had club cars, like the train on which we're going to be riding. Being on a train, or at least this train, was like being on a cruise. You paid a flat rate for your ticket. You had a sleeping compartment that during the day was a place where, like several chairs where you could sit and look out. But at night it turned into a sleeping compartment, you got breakfast, a full breakfast. Lunch, again, a hearty lunch, and a wonderful dinner. It's all included in the price. There are always snacks and drinks available in the club car. While we had a place to sit and look out in our compartment, most of the times we rode in the observation car, which is high above most of the other cars. You can see the observation cars above the cars, so it gave you a full 360 view around. The picture to the right is the end of the train, and it's the club car, and also a very enjoyable place to sit, and you got windows to look all around and lots of things to eat and drink. I mentioned you got meals. There's only a small kitchen on the train. I am not exaggerating, For 4 days, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we had 5-star meals. Carol still talks about one of the fish meals that we had. Please note that this is our compartment. During the day there was chairs, but at night the beds folded down. Please note who had the lower berth and who had the upper berth. As I pointed out, there were several observation decks on the train, and it gave you a wonderful panoramic view of the scenery as we went across Canada. In my last presentation, I talked about the Canadian Shield. It's a large swath in eastern Canada that extends out into Manitoba, where molten rock came up, and it is very close to the surface. Sometimes only a foot or so of earth sits over that molten rock. During the Ice Age, the glaciers came south and they scraped away in numerous locations large pockets of that molten rock. Subsequently, it was filled with fresh water. As a result, Canada has over 1 million freshwater lakes. Our journey takes us along the Great Lakes, and in this particular picture, along Lake Huron, and some very dense and beautiful forests. Northern Ontario, in terms of land mass, covers about 90% of the province of Ontario, but it only has 6% of the population, around 700,000 people. The area is known for its outdoor activities and rugged inhabitants. Those rocks that you see are outcrops of the Canadian Shield, and they are some of the oldest of the most visible rocks here on Earth. On our trip through Ontario and later out through the Rockies, it was not unusual to see a moose. The staff on board the train said they often saw an albino moose, but we didn't see one. I don't know whether they were just kidding. I love waterfalls. And as we traveled through Northern Ontario, you saw one after the other. It was absolutely great. One of the problems of traveling 24/7, so to speak, through these gorgeous areas, after a while, one after the other just is more gorgeous, and your mind starts to have problems trying to remember which one was the best one. Just before we leave Ontario, we're going to pass the Lake of the Woods. This is another area that was carved out by the glaciers, and then water came in and filled up those gougings. There are a lot of Canadians that have summer homes on these islands. It's a neat place to go. This is a picture, a gentleman in the center, of the Prime Minister of Canada. He's at a reservation, or reserve as they call it, the First People of Canada. And it's located near Lakes of the Woods. The First People are treated somewhat better in Canada, but there is still a need for improving their economic and living conditions. At least the Prime Minister gets out and talks to them. We are now going into Manitoba, the first of three which are called the Prairie Provinces. Lots of agriculture, lots of flat land. But I got to tell you, each one of the provinces are unique in their own respect. I'll always remember as we entered Manitoba, looking up and seeing a group of very large birds. So large, I wondered if they were real. Were they a kite? They were so big. It was the first and only time in my life that I have seen a wild stork. Notice how large the area is of his wings. He can do some heavy lifting. The area in green is the province of Manitoba. The blue dots again are water. Manitoba contains over 100,000 lakes, and one great big one besides Hudson Bay. It's Lake Winnipeg, one of the world's largest inland waterways. Again, all that water is fresh water. Manitoba, 2/5 of it is forested land. The economy of Manitoba is a market economy based largely on natural resources, primarily agriculture. Agriculture tends to be concentrated in the fertile southern and western parts of the province. It is vital to the province's economy. Some friends who have traveled across this particular area and all the other prairie provinces, because it's flat, they find it boring. Not once during the trip did I find the prairie provinces to be boring. Again, this is in northern Manitoba, and this is again the Canadian Shield, only this time the rock is up closer to the surface where you see the brown. There's very little soil between it and the molten rock. Winnipeg, the capital of Manitoba. It rises above the prairie. and it's a metropolis where you least expect to see one. But it is cultured, it is confident, and yes, it's captivating. It's more than just a stop on our trip across Canada. It's truly a destination in its own right, with a number of world-class museums and a wonderfully diverse dining scene. This is a unique building, both architecturally, where that bluish green is, the light comes through into the building through that area. This is the Canadian Museum of Human Rights. It is dedicated to the basic rights belonging to every human being. The purpose of the museum is to explore the subject of human rights with a special but not exclusive reference to Canada. Its goal is to enhance the public's understanding of human rights and to promote respect for others by encouraging reflection and dialogue. Winnipeg is home to a state-of-the-art aerospace and defense industry. It is the largest such industry in Canada. It is a diversified group of world-class manufacturing, repair and overhaul, as well as service firms. The local industries are export-oriented. Approximately 80% of their combined $2.2 billion a year sales are external to Canada. Lake Manitoba, which is just, north of Winnipeg. It's an impressive 125-mile long with a maximum width of 28 miles lake. It has over 1 million acres of water. It is truly an outdoor utopia. These are the folks enjoying a very lovely beach at Lake Winnipeg. It's actually on the southern end, quite close to Winnipeg itself. These are the average temperatures in Winnipeg. I've circled in green 2 parts of the year where the temperature never goes above freezing. So when it's summer, they really enjoy the summer because they know what's coming, a very cold winter. 5 months out of the year, it's below freezing all day. A number of my friends in the Canadian military forces try everything they can not to get assigned to the military base just outside Winnipeg. This is their reasons. This is something they told me and I wrote down. If you can tolerate brutal winters, the spring floods, the mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds, and more or less constant wind, you're going to love it in Winnipeg. That's a little harsh. We know somebody that lives there and likes it. This is Lake Winnipeg in the winter. It's great if you like ice fishing. No, you won't be doing any swimming there in the winter. Back on the train, we continue our journey westward to the next province, Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan pointed to on the map with the big red arrow. Again, the economy of Saskatchewan has an agricultural focus, resulting in the moniker, the breadbasket of Canada. Approximately 95% of all items produced in Saskatchewan depend upon the basic resources available in the province. They produce various grains, livestock, and they have oil and gas. Potash, which I'll explain in a minute. They also have uranium, wood, and spin-off industries that fuel their economy. I said it was flat. It is flat. The roads are straight. But if any of you have traveled in our Midwest, land is flat. I used to spend a lot of time in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Looks much like this, flat, flat, and straight. The province of Saskatchewan is Canada's most important grain-producing region. And it's the largest producer of wheat in the country. Most wheat farms grow hard red spring wheat. The wheat is planted in the spring, grows through the summer, and you can see it waving back and forth. And then it is harvested in early autumn. One of my close friends, when he was in college, spent the summer going from south to north harvesting wheat. As he explained it, it was not easy work. But he made a lot of money to get him through college. One of the frustrations of traveling on a passenger train in Canada, particularly a long distance one, is that freight trains had the right of way over slower passenger trains, which is just the opposite from when I was a youth. Very often we would have to move off to a side rail and let the freight trains pass. Even though that was a little bit of an imposition, it gave us an opportunity to get off the train and sometimes stand out in the middle of nowhere and have a look around. It was nice to get off the train and smell the local earth and the fragrances from what it grows in the region. On several of those stops, we saw this is a fairly big church on the left, but church on the right is pretty typical of the churches that we would see both in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. But several times we saw churches that in my mind looked to be Russian Orthodox. Mentally, I had a problem thinking about Russian Orthodox churches being out here in the middle of Canada. I remember seeing them and understood why they were up in Alaska, because that was part of Russia before. But they turn out that there are a lot of immigrants that came to this region and that are farmers that were from the Ukraine. As such, these are Ukrainian Orthodox churches. Nearly 2/3 of the world's recoverable potash reserves are located in central Saskatchewan. This is a potash mine. Saskatchewan has almost 75% of the world's reserves. Potash is a potassium-rich salt that is mined from underground deposits formed from evaporated seabeds millions of years ago. Potassium is essential for all plant, animal, and human life. This is one of the largest cities in Saskatchewan. It's Saskatoon, the city known as the Paris of the Prairies. And it's named that because of its 7 bridges. It was a major meeting place 4,000 years before Europeans came to this area. First Nation people have been gathering there, just north of the city, for close to 5,000 years. Sort of skip through the first 2 prairies, but there's some interesting information there. We now come to the province of Alberta. It's one of my 2 favorite provinces. Alberta is a fertile slice of land dominated by the Canadian Rocky Mountains to the west and the Great Plains of North America. The southern part of the province is chiefly plains and almost treeless. As you reach the slopes of the Rocky Mountains, you see more and more trees in the foothills. There's also more trees in the northern part of the province. Alberta has countless snow-capped mountains, many reaching over 11,000 feet high. Alberta is also known as Big Sky Country. Agriculture and the raising of beef is a significant industry in Alberta. And yes, those are cowboys on their horses rounding up the cattle. The province of Alberta has over 3 million head of cattle. Alberta beef enjoys a healthy worldwide market. When people think of cowboys, they tend to think of Texas. These beef will tell you otherwise. Alberta has more cowboys than Texas. They have more beef, horses, and oil, and they sell more cowboy hats. If you want to know more about Alberta, and you can get a download of Netflix, there's a show, and this is the cast of the show, called Heartland. Some of the episodes, early episodes, are on YouTube. You'll find out, if you're able to watch the show, you'll see why Albertans think they're bigger and better than Texans. The show is an hour long, and it is a tradition across Canada to watch it on Sunday evening. It's been on for 14 years. The show is about a family. The girl in the center is a star. Began when she's 16, and she's up to where she's 32 years old now. Follows the life of that family. The show is not only seen in Canada, it's seen around the world. But it has not been on US TV. I suspect because it is about the land and the travails of a Western family. It's not about sex and violence. This is that young girl in the middle of the last picture. Her name is Amber Marshall, and she is the star of the show. And this is her real-life wedding on her 120-acre ranch she owns now with her husband in Alberta. The wedding was outdoors, and she is an expert horse rider. Here she is riding side saddle with her father escorting her down the aisle by leading her horse. Alberta has the largest herd of wild buffalo in the world. There's a park in the northeastern part of the province that has several thousand, I think about 35,000 buffalo that roam wild. Alberta has a two-edged sword situation. Those areas in orange are called oil sands. Oil is extracted from those sands with a great cost to the land from which it came. It might surprise you that Canada is the third ranking nation in the world with oil reserves. Problem is, it's in the sand. It takes a great deal of heat and energy to extract that oil from the sand, but they do. 45% of the oil imported into the United States, I'll repeat that, 45% of the oil imported into the United States comes from Alberta, Canada. While we enjoy cheap oil, international energy firms are producing. At the same time, they're turning beautiful forest areas into wastelands. Unfortunately, it's with the government's approval because they're making a lot of money. And just as here in the US, the Canadian dollar reigns almighty. Let's move on and look at a prettier picture. Those are some of the snow-capped mountains that you can see from the farm, or ranches I should say. This is a typical ranch in Alberta. This is the largest city in Alberta. Close to 1.5 million people live there. It also has the record of having more millionaires of any other place in Canada. Most of their millionaires can trace their windfall to Alberta oil. We now move up into the Canadian Rockies and to a town that's down there in the valley called Jasper. The area around is called Jasper National Park. The town of Jasper is set in a valley, small little town, catering to a lot of people that come to visit the national park, which you can do almost year-round. It's accessible. They keep their roads clear. Jasper even has a Tim Hortons. If you're not familiar with Tim Hortons, you haven't been to Canada. They are pervasive. In every little town and burg across Canada, you will find a Tim Hortons. It's like a Dunkin' Donuts, only bigger. Once again, we board the train, and we're going to begin a breathtaking ride through the Canadian Rockies, leaving the province of Alberta and going into the province of British Columbia. You can see Alberta off to the right. This is British Columbia. For the next few slides, I'm not going to talk. I'm going to sit back and enjoy our trip through the Canadian Rockies. Welcome to British Columbia and Vancouver. Vancouver is the most densely populated city in Canada, and it is growing at an exponential rate. Early on, they recognized that they needed to do some very important urban planning. Thus, the city is characterized by high-rise residential and mixed-use development. It's an alternative to sprawl. Vancouver has been called the city of neighborhoods. Each neighborhood in Vancouver has a distinctive character and ethnic mix. People of English, Scottish, and Irish origins were originally the largest ethnic group in the city. And elements of British society and culture are still visible in a number of areas. But the city has become very ethnically and linguistically diverse. 53% of Vancouver's residents do not speak English as their first language. Almost 30% of the city's inhabitants are of Chinese heritage. And there's reason for that because of things that happened in the British Commonwealth. But these Chinese immigrants didn't come as takers. They brought a lot of money, particularly from those coming from Hong Kong. And they have invested that money in Vancouver and in British Columbia. And they've got great returns on those investments. Vancouver has been known as the Hollywood of the North. Approximately 65 movies and 55 TV series are produced or filmed there annually, and is the third largest film and TV production center in North America. It supports over 20,000 jobs. Although Vancouver itself and its residential areas is tightly packed with these high-rises, nature is very nearby, particularly in the form of this park to the left. It's called Stanley Park. Vancouver's largest and most beloved urban park. It is a magnificent green oasis in the midst of a very urban area. It has everything from totem poles to beautiful landscaping and walks all the way around that part of it, the park. It also teems with wildlife. One can explore this 400-acre natural rainforest and enjoy the views of water, mountains, and majestic trees. Close to 1 million tourists journey to Vancouver each year to depart on ships headed north to Alaska on a cruise. That's quite a fancy dock they've built, but they make a lot of money from all those passengers going through the port of Vancouver. Stanley Park is not the only urban oasis in Vancouver. There are lots of little parks that people can get out and walk and enjoy nature. In one of the parks, high on a hill overlooking downtown, there is a restaurant. And Carol and I sat there and enjoyed a very leisurely lunch, looking out at downtown and at the mountains to the north and to the east. I mentioned my grandfather and grandmother's trip to Vancouver earlier. This is the City Hall. They were married in on August 29th, 1913. Before leaving Vancouver, I need to point out a geographic abnormality. In 1819, the United States and Canada agreed on the border west of the Great Lakes should be the 49th parallel. As you come across Canada and the United States, there are several places along the border that usually are on water where the land is in the United States, but there's no physical way overland to get to the United States. People have to go through Canada. Point Roberts, the little arrow down there, is in the state of Washington in the United States. But it is physically connected to Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, not to the state of Washington. Residents who want to drive over to their home state of Washington must go through Canada and then come back through immigration and border control coming into the United States. They don't need to show their passport. They have unique ID cards. The lady standing next to the marker is in the state of Washington. Those homes beyond the fence are in Canada, Vancouver. Until 2 years ago, the fence did not exist, only a series of markers like the one here to the left. Guess who had the fence installed? It wasn't Canada. These are some of the homes in Point Roberts. Very nice homes, and you see why people will put up with the inconvenience of living in a part of the United States that is not physically connected to the United States. Our journey is not complete. We leave the train in Vancouver, and we're going to take a ferry across to Vancouver Island. The island is pretty long, 286 miles in length, and at its widest point, it's 62 miles in width. Reference, there are close to a little over 2.5 million people that live in the metropolitan area of Vancouver. Vancouver Island has a few less. They only have 800,000, but spread over a very wide area. State-owned ferries, or province-owned I should say, run between the mainland and Vancouver Island from several points. The transit time is about 2 hours, but the ferries run about every 2 hours, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Welcome to Vancouver Island, a place that Carol and I love. The island has a large city in the southern part of it called Victoria. It is a very, very lovely city, which has a British feel, and which almost half of that 800,000 number of people live there. The rest of the 400,000 live in less populated areas throughout the rest of the island. There are 2 hotels that look similar on the island. This one sits on the harbor, and it is very, very British. It serves a traditional English tea every afternoon at 4 p.m. Lots of beautiful flowers in Victoria. Has a unique garden just outside of town that is known worldwide. We move up almost into the center of the island, but on the eastern side, to a town called Qualcomm Beach. Carol and I had the privilege of staying there for a week and using it as a place that we could go and tour the rest of the island. Qualcomm Beach is along the inland waterway, going up all the way up to Alaska. It is protected on the west side by a series of high mountains, and actually on the east side by high mountains. So it's almost like a valley with a big body of water. As such, the temperatures there are fairly mild in the summer and not cold in the winter. It is known as the Sunshine Coast. Many Canadians, particularly from those Prairie Provinces that get tired of those very cold winters, retire here. Note the green off to the left, that's a golf course. One afternoon, Carol and I decided to play a round of golf. As we were coming up to one of the greens and about to putt, we see a snake wrapped around the flagpole. We decided not to play that hole and move on. Almost directly across from Qualcomm Beach is a small town which produces a lot of the lumber that we get here in the United States, particularly lumber that's used on the West Coast. The town is called Powell River, and it's where my grandparents lived after they were first married. Once again, over the next few slides, I'm going to be quiet and let you enjoy some views of Vancouver Island. Most of the pictures you're going to see are inlets or directly out into the Pacific Ocean. Yes, Vancouver Island, the north part, has some fantastic skiing. Not the type that I do. I need groomed trails, not like these folks that are going to hike up and then sled down some ungrooved trails. We have reached the end of a two-session journey across Canada from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. It has been a quick trip. I'm not able to tell you a lot of things, but I hope I've educated you on a few things. And I hope that you've got an appreciation for our neighbors to the north. Because our neighbors to the north really love the United States. And they migrate across that border very frequently. They go back to Canada, but they enjoy the South during the winter. Thank you for being with us on this journey. I hope to be able to do some other journeys with you in the near future. Have a good day and stay safe.